join us, Lea, if you're available. Aha, we do.
Yes. Can you see the screen? Does that work?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Well, welcome everyone. So I'll speak about two kind of separate types of works that I've been doing over the last years, but they're also related. So I'm trying to bring them together. And that is the work that we're currently doing with my current company, which is ethics. We develop in all different kind of fields, so not limited to the health sector, but really all fields. Try to develop ethical tools for innovators all around. So looking at design, but also obviously the whole field of data and machine learning, AI, and trying to support actually companies, but also researchers in developing ethical applications of these and ethical products based on these new technologies. And when we say, or when we speak about innovation ethics, people usually go like, oh, innovation ethics, that seems like a really broad field. But so it's this moral question of what is desirable and what is the right way to act, or how should the world be organized. So that's ethics in a nutshell, basically. And when we look at innovation, we're usually interested in three levels, on three levels of questions in that context of innovation. So we first have all the ethical questions that are linked to technology. We also have, on a second level, all the questions that are linked to the broad diffusion of a technology. So the implementation, which is something I'll speak about more in detail later. And then we have the more abstract level, which is the general narratives of how we make sense of the world, and the technology obviously plays an important role in that. And in order to find answers to these questions, we need first a normative framework, right? So we need to see, based on what types of metrics, if you want to call them like that, do we want to analyze if certain innovation is ethically good or maybe not. And so we always come from the values approach, and we try to see which values actually found our society and also the way we interact with each other. And we have their values on three levels that I'll pick up in a bit. And I think somebody is speaking in the background, but anyway, I'll continue. So we have the individual level, so the values that are linked to me personally. We also have values that are on the group level, so how we interact with each other. And then we have values that are really on the societal level, linked to the environment, for example, but also broader societal and economic questions. And so that was just a very broad overview, and I will happily apply this quickly to the use case of AI in radiology, which was also the subject of my master thesis, so a topic that I know more about than other things. And so if we take these three levels back here, we find that these ethical questions also arise on these three levels. And I think some of them have been mentioned in the previous two talks. So we have, on the technology side, all the ethical questions linked to the data, the quality of the data, bias, and so forth. The algorithm itself, so how is an algorithm developed, human in the loop, for example, but also obviously how secure, how accurate is it? And then the questions linked to explainability, the black box problem that we've heard before. On the justice level, we have different groups of questions, and here I kind of tried to group it again with these kind of linking it to the value, like the different value groups. So on the individual level, we have questions linked to consent, but also the responsibility of the individual. So who is responsible for mistakes of these algorithms? What responsibility do I have as a developer or as a radiologist? Then we have the group level. So how is it, how does that kind of the justice question linked to the deployment, right? So we have the idea of loss of skills, something that was mentioned as well. So do radiologists, do they lose skills by using these algorithms? But then also this idea of transitional justice. So will radiologists actually be replaced? And if yes, like what does that mean for them in this transition phase, or for the radiologists that are in this transitional phase? Like, I believe that that's not going to happen, but it's a topic that keeps coming up. So I think it's important to speak about it. And then on the societal level, we have the impact on the healthcare system, and obviously the availability of this technology linked to resource inequality, but also on this, I think this particular technology can actually lead to a wider availability of healthcare in regions that are currently underserved. And I think that's something we're seeing also as a field of application for AI in radiology. And so the most abstract level of questions we're asking ourselves, the narrative ones. So here, I think this idea of identity, so of radiologists or other professions that are medical professions, is an interesting one. So how do I define myself, and what makes up a radiologist now and in the future? But then also the role of radiologists in the wider health context. So currently in the hospital setting, where many radiologists work, they have a very specific function, I would say, but that might change due to the use of this technology. And so how do they reposition themselves in the setting? And finally, these questions linked to this kind of human side of medicine, the idea of, is medicine only an accurate diagnosis, or what is the element that care plays, and how will that be affected by such a technology? So that was just a quick introduction to innovation ethics for this topic that we're discussing today. And for the rest of the time I have, I will gladly share the results from a research that me and some colleagues ran back in 2019, actually started in 2018. And that we published last year. I know that some of my co-authors are here today as well, my supervisor from back in the days. So I'm very happy to be able to speak about that again. And so what I was interested in back then was understanding what were the facilitating but also hindering factors of implementing AI-based solutions in Dutch radiology departments. So I really took on not so much I didn't look so much at the technology itself, but rather understanding the organizational context within these hospitals that was hindering or facilitating the uptake of AI. And like I said, we resulted in a publication last year where we also published the results of the study more in detail. And in order to approach this topic, which at the time was even, I guess, more upcoming. So I think 2 years in this field already make quite a big difference. So in 2018, it was really just about to start, and all over the Netherlands, actually, some researchers that were very much at the forefront of developing and also trying to use these tools in clinical practice, but de facto using really regularly on their day-to-day basis were very few of the radiologists I talked to. And what we used as a framework was this framework by Tricia Greenhall, I think that's how you say her name, which comes from the field of implementation research. So understanding why certain innovations or also changes in the healthcare system work or do not work. So the NAS framework stands for non-adoption, abandon, scale up, spread, and sustainability. So really trying to understand why certain technologies might not be adopted. And they give us different levels of analysis, and we try to cover those. What I did very concretely was explorative study. I ran 24 interviews with radiologists, but also members of hospital management, innovation management, and technical staff from hospitals. And they were from 7 hospitals across the Netherlands. and also talked to representatives of the wider healthcare system, so the Professional Association of Radiologists in the Netherlands and some other association, organizations. And I also did a document analysis trying to understand, some of these elements, how they were impacting public opinion, but also the more wider health and policy context at the time. And so what we found, I will just divide this into facilitating and hindering factors and kind of link it back to these three categories of ethical questions that I presented in the beginning. So for the facilitating factors, so things that actually helped the uptake, on the technology side, we looked at the integration into the PACS system, so the picture archiving and, wow, I don't remember don't know what the C stands for. Anyway, the systems that radiologists use to look at their images, so that basically, and that was really one of the major factors. The easier it was to include it basically in their existing systems, the more likely they were to use a software or an AI-based. I see somebody's helping me in the chat. Thank you very much. In their day-to-day practice, but then also the expected benefits. So both on an operational level, so kind of time, efficiency, resources, but also the expected improved diagnostic practice. And I think the expected here is very important because at the time, and I think that hasn't changed a whole lot, there was very little clinical research available to show that AI was actually making, was actually providing operational gains or providing improved diagnostic practice. Then on the implementation side, we had the workflow changes. So basically the step for step, what happened between taking a medical image and basically providing a radiology report, and sometimes even further. So the communication also with the clinicians in the hospital. And then we found, and I think that has been, from what I have read also over the last years, has been proven over and over again, the presence of a local champion, as I called it back then, as very helpful. So somebody within a hospital, within a radiology department that says, yes, AI is great and we really should go for it. We should try it out. And this is something we need to invest in for the future. And that really, I think, was one of the major facilitating factors. But then also having from a hospital context, an innovation manager or innovation strategy that kind of said, as a hospital, we want to focus on this topic and we want to invest in AI in general. And on the narrative side, I think the pressure on healthcare budgets is one of the biggest things. So kind of this narrative that we keep hearing over and over again, that our healthcare is way too expensive. And I think that, so currently living in Switzerland, it's the case in Switzerland, it was the case in the Netherlands, and I think it's the same in the UK, that just this narrative of having to become more efficient in healthcare. And I think there is a big narrative, and I'm not sure that it will actually be able to provide these benefits in the long run, but that obviously would be great, to provide these cost benefits also for healthcare. And then for the hindrance, and I think here's ethical issues that I explained in the beginning come back more. So on a technological side, again, the some factors linked to the inconsistency of the technical performance. So radiologists observed that sometimes an algorithm would provide very accurate results, other times really not accurate results. So that also obviously led them to doubt the quality of an application. So if I notice that one time it's really good at finding something, but another time it's terrible, then I will not use it standardly and I cannot trust it fully, right? And also in general doubts, I guess, on the quality and safety of certain of these AI software applications. And the point that I raised before, so the absence of empirical evidence that on AI apps. So there was very little research or peer-reviewed published research on these particular applications and AI in general. On the implementation side, we have the issue of, or back in the time, and I think that might have changed a little bit since then, but the acceptance and trust of radiologists, obviously, but also, and I think that is also an interesting point, of the referring clinicians. So in the Dutch hospital system, usually a scan gets mandated not by a radiologist, but by a clinician somewhere at another department, and those were also not fully trusting the use of technology. So I think when we try to enhance the acceptance of radiologists, we also have to think of the further health system and not only this one profession. The absence of guidelines and best practices on how to implement these systems, linked to the fact, obviously, that it was quite early on in the adoption process, but so there were very little help for departments on how could they, what should they actually do now with this particular software application. There was for the few cases that I observed, very little planning and monitoring on the application. So a decision was taken to try out something, but then there wasn't a systematic way of monitoring if the particular algorithm or software they were using was actually providing them with any benefit and was actually safe, or the quality was good enough. And so that also in the long run, I think, is an important point to take into consideration, to monitor also the implementation of these software applications. And then obviously the factors linked to the societal system, so uncertainty of funding, who would pay for this. So there's in the short run, it's an additional cost that gets added up to the cost of a diagnosis, and so who is going to pay for that within the hospital, but also then on a wider scale in the health system itself. And then also obviously legal and regulatory uncertainties. It was before the new medical device regulation came into place. So back in the time, there was very little regulatory framework, or almost no regulatory guidance on that. And the last one that I'll mention here is this narrative question, and it's about the professional identities and how we reframe basically what, as I mentioned before, what a radiologist is and what responsibilities, not only radiologists, I think also the other physicians and other actors in the health system have. And I think with that, I'm coming to an end. So what we kind of try to deduct from these results is kind of a more practical approach on what can, how a very high level, but a guide on how to organize these implementation processes within a hospital context. And those are some of the questions that we think is important to take into consideration there. Thank you, and I'm happy to discuss and hear your questions.